All right, so introducing Nivia and her fancy, fancy shoes.
Hi, good morning, y'all. How y'all doing today? Woo! See, this is like the benefit of being like one of the early speakers. You still have energy in you, so I'm super stoked about that. All right, so thank you for having me. Oh, we're not going to advance? Is that what's happening? Okay, bye. All right, so my name is Nivia Henr, and I'm here because I love to learn and share. I was formerly in Pittsburgh and helped run an Agile meetup there, and these days my favorite things are ranting on Twitter about the state of the world, playing board games with two of my favorite wait, they're not, one of them is human. Andre, my husband, and my cat, Lyra. And I am an engineering manager at Spotify, and I have a wonderful set of teams that I work with, and I'm very proud to be a Spotifyer. I told my husband, I promised him that I would never show this slide again, but I lied. So this is Andre and Lyra, my two favorite beings. All right, so today we're going to talk about what a value stream is, why does it matter, and once you know why it matters, how can we improve it? Does that sound good? Yeah, so let's get started. All right, so some crowd participation. Raise your hand if you know what a value stream is already. Okay, a good mix of people, excellent. Now keep them raised if you know your own product's value stream. All right, a couple of hands. And keep it raised even more if you've taken steps to optimize you, sir. Oh, two people. Okay. Well, one of you are going to have to do rock, paper, scissors because I brought a prize from Spotify, and you're the winner. So whoever won rock, paper, scissors gets a pretty sweet package from Spotify. I won't spoil what it is, but it's pretty freaking awesome. Okay, so later at the happy hour, you'll get your prize. Got it. Cool. Let's keep rolling. All right, so a value stream is a sequence of activities that are required to design, develop, test, and ultimately ship your product or service. So in this case of software development, it means how does an idea or a request, usually from your customers, go from the ideation state all the way out to production and ultimately live. And so this is sort of the visualization, a very simplified, abstract visualization of a value stream. There are really three main buckets, which is like the idea and all the associated tasks with generating and validating the idea. Then there's the actual development, and usually it's done in an agile development way. And then there's the actual steps to release it out into the wild. So typically, in the ideation state, a lot of what's the work happening is validating the idea. So that means determining like what is the value proposition, determining who the users are, determining the pricing model, scoping out the features. You can go as far as even prototyping it in this stage. And ultimately what you're trying to get to is some kind of go or no-go to move forward. The agile development phase is really what many of us are aware of, which is like how you're incrementally and iteratively developing the product, and either you're shipping it in small increments behind feature flags, or you're preserving it in some kind of pre-production environment. But the idea is like this is where like the magic happens. And then there's the release. And so every associated activity to actually ship it as a whole comprehensive product is usually what I mean when I say release. So does that make sense so far? Cool. I see a lot of nods, so that's good. Okay, but there be dragons in this simple little model, and let's talk about what those are. So the agile side of things has a lot of known practices. So a lot of people understand and have addressed some of the challenges there. So I don't spend much time in that area of the value stream. Where I do want to spend a lot of time is the fact that getting to the development, getting to the teams ultimately takes a long time. Now, why might that be? Oftentimes, it has to do with first of all, if you're unclear of your overall strategy, you can get bounced around when requests come in because you start thinking, well, does this fit our model? Does this fit our values? Does this fit our strategy? So that's one challenge that's typically experienced in the ideation. Another big challenge is literally prioritization. Oftentimes there are more ideas than there are hands and bodies and minds to execute them. And so being very careful about how these ideas/requests are prioritized. Without that careful deliberation, oftentimes ideas get stuck, and what tends to happen is something called HIP prioritization, which is highest important person prioritizes, which means, like somebody's like, I said so, and it's my idea, it's my baby, and here you are, and that's how things are prioritized, which is the worst thing that could absolutely happen. And on the release side, it's also like once the development is done, there's a lot of excitement that the product is ready to go, but oftentimes that excitement is dampened by how long it actually takes to get it out to the market. And that's because if the dev and ops teams, sometimes they're in silos and they have completely different priorities, and so it takes time to get onto the backlog of an ops team to help you, or a training team, or a marketing team. If you have no automation or no CI/CD pipeline, like good luck, like your life's gonna be pretty much hell. But it's really, really hard to deploy on a timely fashion, and your features get stale. On the product side, if there are arbitrary delivery milestones, they may not actually make sense, and they might not actually align with your development cycle. So all of those are reasons why it takes a really long time for things to ship, even if the development of things is fast. Now, if you're like sitting here going, blah, 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 great, I don't care. Like, what are you talking about? Well, here's why you should care. This is a very simple example feature, and let's take a look at what's really happening. Don't worry about all the colors and everything. What's really important to understand here is from the time the idea or the request is captured to how long it takes live. And as you can see, the very top are weeks, and you could see that in this sample, it's a 45-week life cycle. And oftentimes what happens is it takes 18 weeks in this example. It took 18 weeks to get the idea onto the development team for them to start developing. And that's because although the idea might have been captured and the clock started to tick on day one, we spent 18 weeks just waiting, and this is a lot of time wasted. And the waiting could, by waiting, what I mean here is that we're not necessarily taking meaningful action forward. We're doing things like, I'm waiting to have a meeting, so-and-so on vacation, I can't make my mind up, we're churning, and so on and so forth. And that's a long lead time, so that by the time it finally gets to the Agile team, all of a sudden, I love it, it's like, we're gonna take our time and really think this through about the strategy. And then once it gets to the development team, it's like, go, we're late, you better run, let's do this, blah, 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 right? Like everybody's nodding because y'all feel this. Feel free to cry on the person's shoulder to your right. Okay, so we get to this dev cycle and the crunch is on, and we're sitting here not recognizing, so then I hear things like, oh my gosh, development takes so long to do, and oh my gosh, why do we need to do all this comprehensive testing? Let's just get it out the door, without realizing that it took this long just to bring it into the development cycle, and it might take even longer, in this example, 9 weeks to release it for other reasons. So really, what I'm trying to say here is that fixating on the Agile part, on the development test cycle part of your value stream is a huge waste of time. You can only optimize those 11 weeks so much. It's like getting blood out of a stone at that point. What you really want to do is focus on the in-stream, the preamble, the ideation work, because shortening that feedback cycle, again, let's take a look here. Shorten that 18 feedback cycle is just going to give you either more time for the development part or get your product out the door faster. Either way, that's a value add. Wouldn't you agree? Cool. All right, so that's why one should care. This is Beyonce. She's my idol. So let's talk about how we actually fix this. Like, fine, I got you all like, yeah, like let's go march in product development's office and tell them they suck and whatever. So that would be great, but then we'd all be jobless. So how do we actually propose viable solutions? So the first thing one can do is to know what your value stream actually is. So what I mean by that is, for every product that you actually ship, you don't necessarily have to do it at the feature level. Like, you decide what increment, what constitutes a product. But once you do, for each of those, document each step it takes, not from development starting, but when the idea is captured. Regardless how you capture your idea. Maybe you capture it in Jira, maybe it's on a piece of paper. Doesn't matter. Document that and start the clock there. And go through an exercise with your team or find a way to track how long it takes to get to, first document what the steps are so that you're super clear about what it really takes. Because sometimes you'll tease out assumptions. Maybe it sits in legal for a long time because they need to approve the idea, right? And the only way you'd be able to know that is if you actually talk through each step. And this is not the time for like, ideals, right? Try to be super realistic and practical about what the steps are, not what they are in the worst or best case scenario, but in your practical case scenario. Once you document what those activities are, estimate or track how long each one actually takes. So that's another key function to do, because that's how you know what's really churn and what's really productive time. And when you're documenting, like, picture yourself doing this as like, let's take the last feature we ship and do this as an exercise. That's one way you could do it. And as you're having that conversation, especially about the timing, there's two things to keep in mind. There's two types of time. One is called processing time, which is time that's actually where action is happening. So somebody is doing something, either somebody is prototyping or a conversation is happening, versus wait time, it's also called lead time, which is where you're just waiting. Maybe you're waiting for an approval, maybe you're waiting for a response, maybe you're waiting for Bob to come out of vacation or whatever it is. Those are the two different times, and it's important to track both because that's the total time that each activity takes, okay? And then identify which teams are involved. Oftentimes, it's not only the development team, there are other stakeholders inside of the organization that are participants in this process, so it's important to document who they are. Now, some tips as you do this exercise. First and foremost, do this as a team. This is not something I recommend doing like on a piece of paper and then going up to people like, look, this is how long it actually takes, and this department sucks. That's not the idea here. The idea is to involve people so that they can not only share their own perspective, but then they could, you'll have built-in empathy because they now understand where the bottlenecks are. And also, keep it blameless. In other words, this is not the time to point out that legal freaking sucks. No, this is the time to say, hey, we have a bottleneck in legal. Let's talk about it. And now you have data to back that up. Also, do it after beer or before beer. Don't do it after beer, that's bad. Do it before beer so that you can have like a nice catharsis afterwards. Or whatever non-alcoholic beverage you prefer. Okay, so this is what it might look like as an activity. This is super generic. I stole this from the internet. But this is what the steps might look like. You have the starting step, and it takes how long? It takes about 0.5 hours on average to complete the step, but then it takes 320 hours in the first node here for it to get to the next step. So this is what I mean by you're documenting the activity, and you're documenting both the processing time as well as the lead time. And then you could overlay this with, okay, the first request happens in marketing, the second request happens in sales, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just a visualization to help you understand what the outcome might look like. And it's super simple. Just get a whiteboard, piece of paper, and just have at it. Cool. So as you're doing this activity, or maybe shortly after this activity, it's time for some heart-to-hearts here. Let's sit down and put our big girl, boy, gender non-binary pants on and have some talks about the reality of the value stream. Talk about, as I mentioned, the distinction between the processing time versus the lead time. Identify where the bottlenecks are, what's taking the longest, and what's causing them. Maybe you find out that, darn it, Bob was on vacation because his dog broke its leg, and now you feel terrible for like ranting at Bob for taking such a long time to approve that damn product. So have those conversations, and then you could say, well, Bob, next time maybe Sue, or let me use a generic name. Maybe Taquisha could take on your task next time. My husband just face palmed hard. Yeah, maybe could be your backup so that we don't have a bottleneck when your dog breaks its next leg. Anyway, note to self, work on better examples. And then, so there's a lot of, at this point, when I usually facilitate these activities, there's like 5 million tasks you can take to optimize your value stream. Don't be tempted to tackle them all. Really focus on what's going to be the highest return on investment, and pick that task next, and then execute that task and move on to the next. So just continuously improve as opposed to trying to do it all, because when you disrupt so much of your value stream, what tends to happen is if something failed, you don't know which node failed, which action failed. So really try to be very scientific in your experimentation with your ideas. Cool. So now that what was this transition? I don't know. I just wanted to use a cat picture in a bar, so whatever. Anyway, now that we've talked a little bit about what your value stream is, what might be some bottlenecks, let's talk about once you identify the bottlenecks, what might be some improvements that you can take. So at the systemic level, which means the whole value stream, the first thing you could actually do is say, our team is not organized in a way that delivers the product efficiently. So that could mean that if you're organized in functional silos, like all the devs are together, all the testers are together, all the blah, blah, blahs are together, then that creates a lot of disruption when you have to deliver the work because the teams don't naturally communicate. So maybe you might say, oh, let's reorganize. So for example, at Spotify, we're lucky that we're not functionally organized, but what we are is we're organized into what we call squads, and it's a cross-functional team, which is great for small feature development, but when we have very large projects across the organization, it's still kind of hard to deliver because our teams are so autonomous that oftentimes they don't know the cultures, values, and ways of working of other teams. And so it becomes super hard. It's almost like we all work at micro companies. And so when we have a major project that crosses the entire organization, we're all like, oh, shoot. I promised I wouldn't curse. Oh, shoot, what happens next? So even at Spotify, I would say there's an opportunity to start thinking about for we call our very large projects bets because we're betting on the future. So I would say that there's an opportunity to organize ourselves around those major projects when they come due. So you could do that. The other thing you could think about is what local optimizations am I making that is making the entire system suboptimal? So that could be, hey, maybe we are I don't have a good example, so I'm going to move on. So that's at the system level. At the ideation level, which means when what we've been talking about, before it gets to development, some of the things you can think about is, first of all, prioritize meaningfully. So one prioritization method that I've used rather successfully is called cost of delay. And it sounds like what it is. Basically, what you ask yourself, and there are calculations to help you, but you just ask yourself, what is the cost of delaying this product? It's almost like opportunity cost. So if we decide to build this and not this, what is the cost to the market? Similarly, if we decide to build it now versus later, what is the loss? What is the cost to the market? And it's a very helpful way of getting the loudest voice, balancing out the loudest voices and the highest important person prioritizing. Another thing we do a lot at Spotify is we do a lot of like paper prototyping, so that we get ideas out to people and they can visualize it and play with it. And that's a faster way of getting approval than conceptually in writing specs where people may not remember the information. Another thing we do very often at Spotify is we do A/B testing behind feature flags. As a matter of fact, that's how most of our products go out. We never roll out to 100% on a product. What we do is we put things behind feature flags and then we test them in market. So we'll do like a 5% test on a feature in Australia, for example, to see how it performs. And now we have data to make the decision as opposed to speculation. And that's been extremely successful. It also means like if you're in a different country or even a different state, your Spotify might be totally different, and that's fine, we'll learn. But that's been super helpful on ideation. From Agile development, again, I mentioned that I'm not gonna focus there on that part of the value stream because that's like getting blood out of a stone. The thing to keep in mind is, first of all, just less Scrum, more XP, which is extreme programming, and more Kanban. That's a whole other rant. Just go to Twitter and you'll find out why. And from a release standpoint, what you want to do is, first of all, think about your architecture. You might want to see if your architecture is a monolith, which makes it super hard to release even the smallest things. So a feature or service-based architecture helps you just isolate what to release, and that makes you more nimble so that you're not always like reshipping the entire code base, essentially, when you have to ship. As I mentioned before, feature flags are your friend, so use them frequently, and they're very low cost, and you're able to easily turn things on, turn things off, so it's low risk to release something as well. Test and build automation is a thing, and it's a beautiful, lovely thing that I love very much. And lastly, have your production teams, like whoever is going to be receiving this and training or marketing to or teaching your end users, have them embed as part of, even if it's temporarily, as part of the product team so that they could learn as the product is being developed. And that'll shorten the life cycle because now you don't have to spend more time training, teaching, coaching, etc. Cool. So yeah, I wanted to like tie this into like one inspirational quote and like leave you like inspired and motivated to change it. And I went on Google looking for one and I couldn't find it. So I tried to make my own. So the original quote was, "One person can change the world." And I was like, well, that's too big. So I was like, oh, one action can change the world. And I was like, nah. So I was like, one action can change the shitty product development lifecycle. And then Andre was like, don't curse in Erie. So here it is. It's one action can change a poor development life cycle. All right, so thank you very much. I think we have 8 minutes left. If you have questions, feel free to clap if this was helpful, and I'll answer questions. Oh. It's also totally fine not to have any questions, too. Ah, yes, sir. Great question. So a lean canvas is basically what I call a one-page spec. And the idea here is that oftentimes we get into this situation when we're pitching ideas or we're evaluating ideas that we have to write the world. And a lean canvas boils it down to what's critical to know about it. So it typically is a one-pager, and it has things like, what is the unique value proposition of this product? Like, what makes it unique? So sometimes it's written as like, it's like Google, but for dogs, right? And it also has things like, who are the core users? What is the cost? So it just has very critical information so that you can quickly evaluate or prioritize an idea. And it's a precursor to then elaborating on the idea through other, usually a one-pager is not going to be enough to like build it out, but it's usually enough to at least give you a sense of whether or not this is worth further investment. Does that answer it? Thank you. Cool. Any others? Yes.
How's your product dev's reception been to shortening their cycle?
Oh, our product dev team? That's an excellent question too. So at first it was like, oh my God, too fast, right? Like, oh, we need to keep up. But over time, like it's been a journey. So over time, we've partnered with them a lot. And so we operate and like we work very closely with our product dev team. They're still on the business side of the org as opposed to the engineering side. But what we do is we have representatives in the business embedded in the team, in addition to the product owner. And then because we use a lot of like A/B testing, oftentimes we're working out the like a prototype with them that we're going to A/B test, or even like the real micro implementation of the real product, and they're helping us articulate that so they feel better prepared to like when the dev is done, they feel like they understand what it is. Helps?
Thank you.
Cool. Yes.
How do you manage your feature flags?
How do we manage our feature flags? Terribly. Truth. Hashtag. It's the truth. Like, we literally have Excel sheets, like what flag is on, what flag is off. To your point, feature flags can get hairy because like you can have like a bunch of overlaying flags, and you want to make sure that you're not, over-indexing a particular user and showing features that you're not supposed to. So the answer is we have exclusive. It's part of our like definition of done, and to like know what the feature flags are, communicate what it is, and ensure that they're not overlaying with other feature flags. And then we track that information and publish it out regularly. It's not a great answer, but it's the reality. Helps?
System side, how do you, are you managing config files on your servers, or do you have a console that you can toggle stuff on and off?
So we have a homegrown system that manages it, system side. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar enough to give you an in-depth answer, but I can find out and let you know. Cool. Any others? Yes.
If I think about trying to measure our value stream at my work, the difficulty I immediately run into is that there's more than one thing going on, so I don't know if the wait time is applying to this idea or that idea, if it's for real because we're actually doing something else of value in that time. How do you deal with that?
That's a great question, too. Oh, I'll stop saying that because, yes, they're all great questions. But, yeah, that's the reality. There's not an elegant answer to that other than to say what you try to do is when you're actually either calculating or observing the delay, you don't know that. You just accept that I don't know what the wait time is until I further investigate or have the explicit discussion. So, so for example, you're tracking, you're doing this exercise and you said, this takes 3 days. And to your point, I have no idea why the 3 days are. So what tends to happen is there might be some actions afterwards to say, if you're using if you're doing it as a retrospective, you could go back to that feature and uncover what those 3 days are. If you're doing it as a conceptual exercise, you may not know that, and you might just have to swallow the fact that you don't know it. And that one action could be, let's find out why it takes 3 days. So it's not an elegant answer, but to your point, it is the reality that a lot of these things are intertwined, and you just have to do some legwork, some discovery to find out what is the intertwining to unthink it.
You're not trying to say it took 2 days of waiting on this thing. It took 2 days from here to there.
It took 2 days from here to there, precisely. Cool. Yes.
What's the best way for a team to communicate, and is that how your team communicates, like on Slack, and do you swear?
Oh my goodness, we swear. Jesus. Yeah, like swearing is part of the Spotify culture, and I love it. Slack is one main way we communicate. We do the stand-up things as well. Teams are co-located. I would say there's no perfect communication modality, but I would say the reason I like Slack is because not only is it asynchronous, but it leaves a trail that you can go back to, and it's sort of ubiquitous. You could just come into a channel and absorb the information. What we do is then email is like when things are official and done, like never have an argument over email, but like have the argument either face-to-face, of course, if you can, or Slack as a way of like recording the history, and then the email is the TLDR / like TLDR, too long, don't read, like the outcome. And I think it works very well in my experience, but nothing beats face-to-face when you can. Does that help? Cool. Yes?
Do you use a project management software or something similar to do sort of data analysis and exploration of where your bottlenecks typically show up on projects?
We do. So I freaking hate Jira, and it can die in a burning fire, but But that's what we use. So teams have a lot of autonomy to use something else, and oftentimes they do. But I must admit, like Jira is just like, if you know, like they've made it thoughtless, and in some ways that's good because then you don't necessarily have to find your own sort of way of storing this information. So the way we use Jira in this instance is that literally we that becomes the starting point for like when the idea has been captured into the, captured from the wild. And then it because you can track the history and the timing, you can add comments as to when things change, or you could actually see, you can set up your Jira workflow to see when things hand off between nodes in the value stream. Shrugs? Thank you. All right. Yes?
So if you manage to speed up your ideation stage by, say, 3 weeks, get product A to the development team 3 weeks earlier, but the development team was already working on project B for those 3 weeks, then you have to somehow increase the bandwidth of the development team. So where's the trade-off there? How do you say, okay, now I just need to hire more people, or what's the solution?
That's a great question. The answer is we prioritize. So because we have been able to shorten our value stream, that at least gives us the choice to have those conversations. And oftentimes it's a super quick conversation. And what we say is, all right, if we're using teams that are, again, have a lot of latitude to use sprints or not to use sprints. So if a team's using a sprint, we're like, well, we're not going to disrupt the sprint. So this waits by default. And that's just the reality. And to your point, we lose the time. But at least it's coming in earlier so that for next sprint, as opposed to next month or in 2 months, we can say, all right, this feature is now ready for us. Do we want to prioritize it higher than something else? So oftentimes we just use the sprint boundary to make the trade-off. If it's that urgent, it's probably not a real product. It's actually an emergency or a hot fix. So then we just fast track it anyway. Does that help? I think I'm out of time. Maybe one last question, sir, and then I'll be.
Any advice on how you convince stakeholders that their steps hold no value?
Ooh, yo! You gave me the hardest question with the time. I would say this activity is a good way of doing it because it becomes, hey, this is not about you or your department or your work. It's about the fact that we've identified this bottleneck. How can we together solve it? I find that that's a really objective way to have the conversation. I can't guarantee that, that there won't be some emotions injected into it. That's why I suggest beer afterwards. But the truth of the matter is, once people see the data and they don't feel like they're being put on the spot, I've found that they've been fairly receptive. So, cool. All right, y'all. Thank you. Have a great year conference.